And my mom's side of the family came through Galveston, probably escaping the pogroms in Russia, and immigrated ultimately to Corsicana, where my mom was born in 1931.
Mm-hmm. And so your parents were both living in Dallas when they married?
They were,
Mm-hmm.
yes. They were high school sweethearts of sorts. They knew each other from high school and got married pretty young. I think my mom was 18 or 19 and my dad was 20. And they were, my dad was attending the University of Texas at the time and came back and finished at SMU and finished he was in the National Guard, so he finished his service for the National Guard.
Mm-hmm. So when they got married, they settled in Dallas as well?
They did.
Mm-hmm.
They did.
And what were they doing for a living at that point?
Mom worked in the home and raised my older brothers, who are 12 and 10 years older than I am, Bruce and Keith Budner. And at that point, and Dad was a banker at First National Bank of Dallas, where he started, I think, when he was 21 years old, and worked in the trust department. And that's really where he worked for 36 years, ultimately rising to the number 2 spot in what was then InterFirst Trust Department.
Mm-hmm. And so you were born then in what year?
1964.
Mm-hmm. And where did you live when you were a child?
We first lived on Royal Crest off of Inwood, the little cul-de-sac off of Inwood. And when I was in 5th grade, I started attending St. Mark's, and we moved to St. Mark's Circle across the street. So I actually can tell my kids I walked to school. And then when I went to college, my parents moved to Glen Lakes, a house in Glen Lakes.
Mm-hmm. What did you do like doing for amusement when you were a child?
I really liked Stratomatic baseball. I was kind of a nerd that way and loved baseball. I used to sit with my grandmother, my father's mother, and she'd sit on the couch and score the Ranger games back in early 1970s when they moved to Arlington. And so I had a real love of baseball. My great-grandfather was best friends with Connie Mack, so there was all this baseball lore because he had spent so much time with Connie Mack traveling with the team, and we had this amazing collection of baseball paraphernalia. And so I really enjoyed baseball and statistics and things like that, and I would play Stratomatic, which was a dice game that simulated a real baseball game. But I was an outdoor kid too. I spent a lot of time playing soccer and baseball and football and all the things normal kids would do.
Mm-hmm. And you went to St. Mark's. Were you active in any school activities?
I played on the varsity baseball team 3 years, and I always played baseball. I played soccer till I was a junior, but I wasn't particularly good at soccer, and it conflicted with debate. And the activity I was really strongest in was debate, and I was on the debate team for all 4 years and debated competitively in the city and outside.
And after high school, you went to Dartmouth. What made you decide on Dartmouth?
My brother Bruce had gone to Tufts in the Boston area, and so I had exposure to the Northeast and saw that it was very different from Dallas. I also knew that I had strong roots in Dallas and very much wanted to come back. And so I wanted to go to a college that would present an experience completely different from one that I would live in permanently. So my dad was kind enough to take me all over. We saw colleges, in the Southeast and all up the seaboard. And, Dartmouth struck me as being kind of what a college should look like. It was so beautiful, and it was very, very different from what I was used to. Beautiful mountains in the background, cold versus hot, and it was a great school. So I applied early and was fortunate enough to get in, which minded me, and I never regretted it. I really had a wonderful experience there.
And what were your main interests in school at that point?
I was a government and policy studies major, and I went to Dartmouth not thinking I would debate. I wasn't good enough to play baseball, and I went not thinking I would debate, even though at that time Dartmouth had the best debate team in the country. But I was going to go be a normal student, and I remember my mom and dad brought me up, and we were outside the Hanover Inn, which is right on the grounds of Dartmouth, and on the corner was this smiling fellow freshman named Chrissy Mahoney, who was would ultimately become my debate partner. And she says, "Hey, are you coming to the debate meeting later today?" And I go, "No, I'm not going to debate." And she said, "Oh, you should come." And I said, "Nah, I don't really want to debate." And she said, "Just come to the meeting." So I ended up going to the meeting, and of course I ended up debating with her 3 of my 4 years in college, and it was a great experience. Very time consuming, but a great experience.
And being a government and policy major made you become interested in law, or?
It did. My brother was a lawyer. My dad had worked with lawyers. My dad always felt like in the trust department, he was envious of those who had gotten a law degree. So he always told me, get a law degree. You don't have to use it to be a lawyer, but it'll put you in good stead. And I heard that message. Also with debate, I was comfortable with advocacy. So I felt comfortable on my feet and felt like maybe I'd make a good trial lawyer, which is ultimately what I did become.
Mm-hmm. And when you decided to go to law school, you came back to Texas.
I did.
And can you tell us about that?
Well, I kind of the flip of my decision on Dartmouth, I felt like if I was going to practice law in Dallas, that it didn't make any sense to stay in the Northeast. And so I applied to Texas and SMU and was blessed to get into Texas, which is a terrific law school. And and it too was a very different experience for me being at a state school. The law school classes I attended were larger than any college class I ever attended at Dartmouth. And in fact, I think we had 500 students in a class at UT Law School, and we only had 1,000 at Dartmouth. So it was a very large, big state school experience, but it was a good one, and it prepared me well.
Mm-hmm. And let's come back to Dallas during your childhood.
Sure.
Did your family belong to a synagogue?
They did.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was the founding president of Temple Shalom, and they may not have stayed members of Temple Emmanuel the entire time, but I know for the bulk of my life they were members of both Temple Shalom and Temple Emmanuel. When I was growing up, we attended Temple Shalom more because my dad was invested in making it successful, I suspect. Mm-hmm. And so Rabbi Besser was the rabbi at that time, and we were close friends with that family.
Mm-hmm. And how did your family celebrate Jewish holidays?
My dad described himself as very reform. And he was on the board of trustees of the Hebrew Union College, and really believed in the tenets of Reform Judaism. And it's an interesting issue that I've thought a lot about. But we did celebrate the major holidays. We always went to Rabbi Besser's and his family's, now Corman's house for Passover, and it was a rich experience. But my dad never wore a yarmulke. He, did not know any Hebrew, and was not really raised with an emphasis on that piece of the religion. Yet his identification with Judaism was as strong as anybody I knew. And my mom's side of the family, my grandmother Lily Albert and my mom Doris, were more observant, a little more wanting to pull the family to, celebrate Shabbat more often and do some of those things. But my dad would go to High Holy Day services. My mom was it was very important to her to go to services, and she was a more observant Jew in the sense of the religious piece.
Now, did you attend Sunday school? Or?
I did. I was confirmed at Temple Shalom.
Mm-hmm. And your parents, were they a part of any Jewish organizations in the city?
They were a part of, I'm sure, countless Jewish organizations, including, I believe, my dad was a part of the Dallas Jewish Historical Society. But they were very active in temple work, and in fact, I'm sure we'll talk about this more at another point, but my mom's genesis with the Vogel Alcove in the mid-'80s was as a social action committee formed by Thelma Vogel. And so that was a temple Shereth Israel, Temple Emmanuel joint committee that formed the Dallas Jewish Coalition for the Homeless, that had all of the organizations in town, Jewish organizations in town, temples and affiliated organizations.
Why don't we go into their interactions with the community at large?
Sure. When I got a little older, middle school or so, my mom started working outside the home and started Needle in a Haystack, which, as you probably know, was the first needlepoint store in the Southwest that they knew of. So it was quite a one-of-a-kind thing with a few of her friends, and really did a lot of that. At some point, I think probably when I went to college around 1983, she started getting more involved in community service and charitable organizations, and that's when she joined a committee with Thelma Vogel. And Thelma was really a visionary. She was older than my mom and had done community service a number of times and was really poised. And my mom was new to all of this. And they, as the story goes, decided to make the project of this committee homelessness. And they formed the Dallas Jewish Coalition for the Homeless. And then the project of that was the Vogel Alcove, which is what the organization is named today, which is a daycare facility for homeless kids. And it resides in South Dallas. And my mom, through that, became incredibly involved in a number of charitable organizations, serving on countless boards: Jewish Family Services, Family Gateway, too many to list. So that was her principal focus. And as you probably know, Thelma Vogel tragically passed away in 1988, I believe. And at that point, my mom and my dad, who had gotten involved to help my mom fundraise, kind of took the organization and really helped to create what it became today, with the help of many others. And what my mom basically did was, she was a very quiet leader, and she would let other people find their voice in the organization and own a piece of the organization. She wasn't a big tell you what to do person, but she had a lot of wisdom, and when she spoke, people listened to her, and people wanted to work with her. And so to this day, you see people who have worked with the Vogel Alcove since its inception, and they come up to me with tears in their eyes and say, "It's because of your mom." Because she was a very, she had a kind of quiet confidence and leadership about her that was second to none. Sorry about that.
Mm-hmm. Let's go back to what you did after leaving UT Law School.
So I came in 1990 to a firm that was called Hughes and Luce, which is actually where I am today. We merged in January of 2008 with a firm called K&L Gates. And I started my career in 1990. I did commercial litigation, worked on a number of, that you probably remember the late 80s, early 90s were a volatile time for business, especially in Texas. And I created a specialty because of the partners who entrusted me with work, working on issues dealing with insolvency and companies that had troubled issues and were recovering money that might have been lost due to the wrongdoing of people who didn't give them good advice or other issues like that. So the first big case I worked on dealt with the failure of MCorp that owned all the M-banks, and the litigation dealing with the FDIC and the Office of the Comptroller of Currency taking over MCorp and whether that was lawful. And so that started my career in kind of a litigation with a little bit of banking and insolvency twist. And I don't know if this will be of interest, that you might cut this out or not, but in 1992, March, I was called by Tom Luce. One of the longtime clients of the firm was Ross Perot. And this was in March, I believe, of 92. And he said, Craig, Ross has gone on the Larry King show and said that if he is to be put on the ballot in all 50 states by the people, that he would run for president of the United States. And he said, Craig, we don't know the first thing about what it would take to get on the ballot in all 50 states. You worked on a brief with that had some election implications, and I worked on, as a young associate, a brief for the U.S. Supreme Court on election law. He says, will you help us figure out how Ross is going to get on the ballot in all 50 states? And that began, together with two other young associates, a small team of folks that would help Mr. Perot in all issues relating to his two presidential election runs in 92 and 96, which was, for a young lawyer, an absolutely fascinating experience, and one from which I grew to greatly respect Ross Perot. Greatly.
Great opportunity.
Wonderful, wonderful.
What other projects have been your favorites?
Work-wise?
Mm-hmm.
We had a big litigation matter for a company you may remember, Vartech Telecom. And Vartech was what they call a CLEC, which meant they rented the phone lines from the Southwestern Bells of the world and resold them to customers like you and me. And you may remember a dime line, 10 cents a minute. Before that business ultimately kind of went out of business because people use cell phones instead of long distance, Vartech acquired Excel, which was a multi-level marketing company. And they wanted to do that to expand their network of people who use the Vartech service. And there was a big piece of litigation that was multifaceted, and it involved a big arbitration in Washington, D.C. in front of 3 judges, including the former FBI director, William Sessions, who was also a federal judge. And it involved a major fraud action where I was able to appear before Judge Barbara Lynn, who I greatly respect. What was special about it was we were all so very young in our careers relatively, and we got to work with an incredible client, a guy named Michael Hoffman, who was the general counsel of Vartech at that time. And the case was very high stakes. It was bet the company. there was over $500 million, a real amount in controversy, a staggering amount for me to even think about. And the camaraderie that the fast-paced nature of the case took on, and the fact that the client trusted this very young legal team to handle it against a very worthy adversary. And despite the fact that one of the arbitrators, in fact Judge Sessions, was the other side's selected arbitrator, we won that case. We won both pieces of the case, but most notably we won that arbitration on a 3-0 decision. And it's always fun to win, but it's even more fun to win when you do it for great people, mm-hmm. and you do it with great people. And we had an incredible team of folks working on it, and it was a real joy. And those friendships have endured for a long time.
And have you been active in any civic organizations?
I have.
Yes.
I've been involved. I'm on the board currently of St. Mark's, where I, of course, graduated from, and my 2 boys, Will and Ben, attend. Will's about to graduate. I have served on the board of Vogel Alco since the mid-90s and have served in every role there, including I was president for 2 years. I have I was on the American Jewish Committee board, I was on the American Jewish Congress board, and I no longer serve on those boards, but I'm fond of those organizations. And more recently, in 2007, my wife and I founded the Dallas Urban Debate Alliance, which is a program that helps largely inner city kids, the DISD students, participate in competitive policy debate. And we serve well over 500 students a year, and it really gives them a leg up, and I'm very proud of that. I'm currently president of the board, and the organization is now 6 years strong and growing, and in fact last year among the 20+ leagues in the United States that have urban debate leagues, Dallas won the award as the top league, which has very little to do with me and a lot to do with the people who work with me, including Nicole Serrano, who's the executive director of the organization, and my wife Dawn, who tirelessly kind of works behind the scenes and gets very little credit. And then finally, I'm a proud member of the board of Temple Emmanuel.
Very good. Let's move into your family. How did you and your wife meet?
My wife was a law school student at UT with me, and UT is broken down. There are 500 students in a class, but then they're broken down into sections, and you have all your first-year classes with people in that section, and there are 100 people in your section. And then it's broken down further into a teaching quizmaster group, which is the person who teaches you how to write. And it's also kind of the beginning of your social group. And Dawn was in that group of 20 with me. We were just friends, really just acquaintances early on. Got to be better friends when we were on the Texas Law Review together, and we both became articles editors. So we shared an office. There were 3 articles editors, and we'd go through articles that professors submitted for publication and pick the ones we thought we might want to publish. And we'd sit for hours in that little office with 3 desks, and so we got to know one another. We advised each other on all sorts of things. And then when we were anticipating taking the Texas bar exam in the summer and going on a trip, which is kind of a tradition for lawyers to go on a bar trip before they start work, we said, why don't we put a group together And so she grabbed a couple of her friends, I grabbed a few of mine, and we formed an incredible group of folks that traveled all around Europe together. And I would say love bloomed a little before the trip, and it blossomed during the trip and after. And she's a special woman that I'm proud to say I've been married to for 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Now, was she originally from Dallas as well?
She was not. She was born in Florida, but moved quickly. Her dad was kind of a project engineer for NASA. So early on, she moved to Clear Lake in Houston, where her dad worked for NASA, and she went to Clear Lake High School. So she then went to UT undergrad and went to law school. And by the way, I should say, was a chancellor at UT Law School, which is, the top 16 students in the class out of 500. So she frequently reminds me that she did far better in law school than I did.
And tell me about your children.
Will is our oldest. He's 18, and he's a terrific kid who is he is incredibly charming and very good with words. He's a great speaker and a neat kid with a big heart. He is right now. He does a lot of things that are very kid focused. So he does camp counseling, and he's worked with small kids and big kids, and he loves psychology, and he loves helping kids. Ben is 14, and he's in 8th grade at St. Mark's. Will's about to graduate, by the way. Mm-hmm. Ben is 14, and he's in 8th grade. He's a great kid, very different from Will. They both love sports. Ben is very active right now in baseball and basketball, and he's also got a special spark in him, he's a good kid. He's got a lot of people who a lot of friends and a lot of people who look up to him. He's a good kid. And then Lily is our baby. She's 9, and she's a parish Episcopal in 3rd grade. And Lily is also they're all so different. Lily is, she is our real prodigious reader. So she has now read the Harry Potter books, 7 volumes, almost 5 times all the way through. And she can read a volume in a day, and she's reading it. It's not a fake deal. So she just has this amazing capacity to love to read, love to learn, and she's always got a smile on her face and kind of a twinkle in her eye. She's also a treasure.
And you obviously belong to Temple Emmanuel.
I do.
And any particular projects that you're working on there that are of interest?
Well, I've been on the capital campaign committee, which is now public, that the temple is going to add and kind of fix up some of the space to create a better environment for spirituality, and I've enjoyed that. I'd run through a brick wall for David Stern, so it's a labor of love. But I have a special affection for the temple and Rabbi Stern's leadership. So I would do whatever the temple needed me to do.
Let's talk about Dallas.
Sure.
How has Dallas changed since your childhood?
It's an interesting question. It's probably changed a little less since my childhood than maybe since my brother's childhood.
Okay.
But for me, the DFW marked the change in Dallas for me, from a business perspective. When Eric Johnson and those other great civic leaders had the foresight to put the world's greatest airport 25 miles from downtown, I think it created all these incredible opportunities to use the land we have at our disposal to bring in companies from all over the world. So for a lawyer at K&L Gates, like I am, with offices in 47 cities and 5 continents, to be able to practice law where probably there are more per capita world headquarters and decision makers in Dallas, Texas than anywhere in the world is a pretty unique treat. So I've watched the city really kind of show its civic pride through the years and go from a city that, I'm a student of history, and maybe a city where its leaders and those with wealth didn't think as much about making the city a better place for future generations, to really in the 70s becoming a city that was proud of the legacy it was leaving. And so that's I guess what I've seen. And I've also watched from a negative perspective in the 80s the failure of the banks, and what that did to my family. That was we were a banking family. Both my great grandfather and my dad were very involved in the banking business, and so that was hard, because as a little kid you kind of root for your dad's company, and to see the company get swallowed up by a company from North Carolina when NCNB bought the bank, that was a big change for me. But I've really been proud to see Dallas kind of step up its cultural and civic game, especially in the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah. How about the Dallas Jewish community? Is it different than it was when you were a child?
It probably is, but it probably is a little lost on me. I think my family was so assimilated into all phases of Dallas by the time I came along, that I was somewhat oblivious to those kinds of divisions. But I have seen, I think, organizations like the Vogel Alcove pop up that weren't necessarily Jewish charities, that were the traditional Jewish charity. Not that any one is better than the other. They're all great. I mean, they're all helping people less fortunate, but kind of spanning the religious chasm that maybe existed. So I've probably seen a progression of the assimilation, and frankly, people make much of the distinctions between Orthodox and conservative and Reform, but I probably feel less of that today, at least socially, between the conservative and Reform communities than I ever did back when I was growing up. And maybe that's because, some friends would go to Sheriff for Sunday school, and some would go to Shalom, and some would go to Emmanuel, and you just know those kids. But that would be my main observation.
Let's talk about your family today. Do your brothers still live in Dallas?
One does, Keith, who is in the commercial real estate business with his wife Elizabeth, and they live on Inwood and Walnut Hill area. And they've got two great kids. One who is getting his PhD at Berkeley in comparative literature, and brilliant, already published all over the world. And his younger brother Lee, that's Keith Jr., his younger brother Lee is also a great kid, and he's a law student in Boston, and is going to be coming to Dallas to start his legal career next year. My other brother Bruce and his wife Maria moved to Berkeley, California about 10 years ago, I'd say. And they have three terrific kids as well. Brooke and Allison are twin sisters, and they live in the Bay Area. Brooke is involved in all sorts of social work projects, including kind of revolutionary community gardens project in downtown San Francisco. Allison is involved in public radio. And Kevin, the youngest of the Bruce and Maria Budner children, is a new lawyer, graduated from Berkeley Law very recently, and then he is in Dallas working for Judge Lynn as her briefing attorney. Mm-hmm. So we get to see Kevin from time to time, but we see them a fair amount. They come to Dallas a fair amount and visit us, and we've still got a very close relationship.
Mm-hmm. And you've won a number of awards for Best U.S. Bankruptcy and Commercial Litigation, Texas Super Lawyers, Best Lawyers. Can you tell me a little bit about some of these?
In the legal industry, there has been a spread of these kinds of awards, and they've gotten a little self-congratulatory. I'm proud of those awards. They're a reflection of, somebody in the community thinks I'm doing something right, and they're really, nice to put on the bio. I think of the great, best lawyers who have been my mentors: Vester Hughes, the current chairman of K&L Gates, Pete Kalis. I worked with Kim Askew for many years, who was the first African-American chair of the ABA litigation section. Judge Lynn, who was my wife's mentor. And I'm still working to be that level of super lawyer. That's a crest that I'm climbing to accomplish. But it's a nice. I'm proud that I've been recognized, but I'm prouder to be associated and trained by some of the great people who've come before me.
Mm-hmm. So what are you most proud of then?
I'm most proud of my family. I know I'm sure a lot of people say they're most proud of their family. And that starts with my parents. My mom pulled herself up by her bootstraps when Thelma Vogel passed away, and was a very reluctant leader, and has made a huge difference in the lives of tens of thousands of people as a result of her good work. My dad, who was a banker, who could have just been a good banker, but he was also an incredible dad, always made sure to coach my teams, always had a smile on his face in the morning for me, and was always there and proud of every accomplishment I ever had. Didn't ever rest on being a banker. He created the largest Teddy Roosevelt collection that was ever privately held, is my understanding, and gave a large chunk of that to SMU when he passed away. I'm proud of my brothers, who have always done right and shown me the way. And I'm incredibly proud of my wife, Dawn, who kind of is one of those like my mom. She works behind the scenes. She doesn't need a lot of pats on the back. She just does it because it's the right thing to do. And I hope those messages have gotten to our kids. I sure have seen a lot of signs that they have, and it makes me very proud. But I regret that they didn't see my parents longer than they did. That was sad for me. And I'm proud of my friends. I've got an incredible collection of friends who I have been lucky enough to run across their paths over the years, and I may see some of them all the time, and some of them not so often. But they always make me just a little stronger. They always call me when I'm a little out of line, or they think I could use a little tie straightening, so to speak. And they make me better. They help me keep doing the right thing every day.
Is there anything that you would like to add that we haven't touched on?
I think the one thing, I don't know, we didn't get into it too much, but the story of Hyman Pearlstone is fascinating. If you want me to dive into it, and I don't know it all, but I'm going to tell you what I know. And I learned. Dawn really. This is one of those Dawn doing something behind the scenes, and no one really appreciates it, but I know and appreciate it. He, in 1896, so he was still in Central Texas, probably 19, 20 years old. He loved baseball, which was of course in its infancy. And he found out that the Philadelphia Athletics were barnstorming in New Orleans, which, for those who don't know baseball, that was how these guys made their money. The season was over, they didn't make much money during the season, and they would go basically put on an all-star game in cities that didn't have baseball, and they would get the gate receipts, and that's how they'd make their money. And so he went to New Orleans to see the Philadelphia Athletics play, and a player went up to him and struck up a conversation and said, "Hey, you've got an Elks pin on. You should introduce yourself to Connie Mack." Well, Connie Mack is probably the greatest manager ever to touch baseball. He was the manager of the Philadelphia Athletics for 50 plus years. He was a player. He did more to change the game than probably any person. And he and my great-grandfather struck up a friendship. And my great-grandfather got a package in the mail, and it was a uniform with cleats and a glove, and it's had a letter, and it said, "Dear Hyman, I would like you to wear this uniform and sit on the bench for Philadelphia Athletics games for as many seasons as you can, for as long as you can, and as long as I'm involved with the team." So he did. He did that. He shut down. I mean, my great-grandfather was very accomplished. I think he was chair of the board of First National Bank of Dallas for a time. We found out he was appointed by Franklin Roosevelt to be the head of the National Recovery Administration in Dallas. But he shut down his business 1 month out of every year, went to travel with Philadelphia Athletics, who during that time had great years and bad years, but during a lot of the time they were the best team in baseball. And it was said that the players would shout, "On the road," you know, Hyman Pearlstone, on the road with the Philadelphia Athletics. Sporting News wrote him as the greatest fan in baseball.
So this would have been during the 30s?
It would have been from 1900 essentially to 1946, you know, right around there. He helped Connie Mack sign two of the great players in Philadelphia Athletics history, Pinky Higgins, who was the son, if I understand correctly, of a Dallas police officer, and Dave Danforth, who was a famous spitball pitcher from when it was legal to do that, from Baylor. And those two would go on to have great careers. And you know, we have incredible memorabilia. We were talking about earlier about my Uncle Billy. I've got pictures of my Uncle Billy when he was probably 3 years old in Babe Ruth's arms on the field before a game. Pictures of my great-grandfather on the bench with the team during the game. We have a picture of my great-grandfather at the World Series in 1929, 2 days before Black Monday, 4 rows behind Herbert Hoover. And he just lived the most fascinating life. He got to be friends with Jack Dempsey and Herbert Hoover, and he had a very rich and interesting life. And I only knew him for a couple of years, but his legacy carries on in some books. He's been mentioned in history books about baseball, and one day I'd love to do his life justice with an account of that life, that rich life. But I thought that would be worth sharing. Yeah.
Thank you. Anything else?
I don't know. I've been blabbing. You guys know. Is there
No,
anything I've missed that?
I think we're perfect.
Good. Well, great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Can you tell us about your family? How they happened to settle in Dallas, where they came from?
What I know on my dad's side is that Hyman Pearlstone came to Dallas in the early 1900s from a little town, Palestine, Texas, and he was a wholesale hardware merchant. I think that was the family business. My understanding is that side of the family came to Texas in the early 1800s. And he was actually, I was told, brought to Dallas by the Higginbotham family to help that family turn around a hardware business. And so he settled in Dallas and then started working with First National Bank of Dallas. My mom's side of the family, I don't know as far back. I do know that some branches of my mom's family come from Corsicana, and some were in San Antonio, and I think my grandmother was the first generation to be in Dallas.
Mm-hmm. Do you know anything about where they lived? Or?
I have all that information.
Mm-hmm.
Do you?
Yeah.
Well,
The
maybe
note
grab me a
was
little
right
bit.
here.
Yeah.